This is my grandfather. This video was captured by a high school student as part of a high school project that was going on throughout the nation. And this story that he tells wasn't really shared until he was in his probably his 60s. He didn't really talk about his service a whole lot, just knew that he served his kids and everything. And then he started talking to his grandchildren's elementary schools. And, it's a big reason why I joined the military. My grandfather was very near and dear to my heart. He was a fantastic man. And I lost him back in around 2006 to cancer that they believe may be related to his service and some of the starvation he had as a prisoner of war. But was just a stellar human being. I edited down the video because it was over an hour long, and it's a lot of Q&A from folks that aren't inside the veteran community that like a high school kid would typically ask a World War II veteran, and I just didn't really want to extend it to that length for you guys. But hope you guys enjoy the video, and here you go.
I was in the 110th Regiment of the 28th Division, and it was a cold but clear day on November the 10th, 1944, when our company commander ordered everyone to prepare to move out. The woods were covered with snow. In fact, it was the coldest winter that the Germans had ever recorded in history. It had been a fairly quiet night. The usual shots were heard during the night, but no patrols had been encountered. Our orders were to infiltrate the enemy lines, attack and destroy the effectiveness of 2 pillboxes, which are gun emplacements made of thick concrete walls dug into the mountainside. These pillboxes were directly in front of our position and provided an opening in the Siegfried Line, that strong defensive line on the German border. We were in the Hürtgen Forest near Schmidt and Vosnik. The 28th Division, of which I was a part, had broken through that absolutely impenetrable Siegfried Line, which protected Germany from all its invaders from the west. Our mission then was to obtain control of these pillboxes to make it possible for the American Army to continue its invasion into Germany proper. Our B Company, the 110th Regiment of the 28th Division, moved toward our assigned goal in the early afternoon. The sun was covered by clouds and the temperature was dropping. My squads, we moved toward our assigned positions. The plan was to move quietly through the German lines, reorganize and attack the concrete bastions from the rear. The movement through the German line was quiet and uneventful. In fact, only a few rifle shots were heard throughout the afternoon, and every squad was soon in their designated positions. Because the snow was about a foot deep, it was a simple matter to dig in and wait for further orders. The unit with the fire shooting bazooka made the first attack and immediately silenced all activities in pillbox number 1. However, the German soldiers in pillbox number 2 called for artillery and mortar fire, and things got noisy and rough. We too had mortar support, which protected our flanks, but the mortar shells only bounced off the solid concrete walls of the pillbox. Our troops began to suffer heavy casualties while we were pinned down by the enemy. Then the bazooka failed. Several attempts were made to send a runner back for new batteries, but each of these attempts failed. So it was decided to stay down, dig in, and wait for darkness. Several large logs and abandoned American tank offered some protection for the diminished number of survivors of the heavy shell fire. There was no screaming or other sounds to indicate when a shell took a victim, but the still bodies told the tale. As darkness arrived and there was no moon, it was black dark. We began to call in a whisper to others to see who were still alive. Out of over 200 that started the attack that early afternoon, 7 of us began our trek home. The soldier in charge was a sergeant, and I was the next ranking soldier, a private first class. The sergeant took the lead carrying a Browning automatic rifle, and I brought up the rear with the same kind of weapon. The going was rough and our hearts were in our throats as we tried to move back to our lines without a sound. We all shared the wonder of why God had spared us, but in single file we knew it would be a difficult night and every step would be fatal. As we began to cross the road, which we knew we had to cross to move back to our lines, we heard German footsteps. They wore heavy, noisy boots. The first 5 of our group got across the road before the Germans got too close. The last 2 of us decided we'd better not try to cross the road before the enemy passed, so we waited in silence. The 2 German soldiers stopped right above us, as though they had heard a sound. Waited a long time, smoked a cigarette, but finally tromped down the road. We waited until we could no longer hear their footsteps. Then the 2 of us made our way across the road to try to catch up with our buddies. It was so dark we dared not call out, so we decided to go it alone. Almost crawling through the woods, we moved slowly but carefully in the direction of our friendly forces. No stars to guide us, no landmarks to steer by, just dead reckoning in the grace of God. We never heard from our 5 fellow soldiers again. They were not taken prisoner to my knowledge and were never reported as returned to duty. My companion was Pedro, a Mexican fellow about my age who spoke only broken English. Together we wormed our way back up the hill. It was icy and suddenly Pedro slipped and began sliding down the icy hill. This brought shouts of halt from the unfriendly forces nearby. The air was immediately full of German conversation as they searched for their enemy. What to do? Where to hide? The thoughts whirled through my mind as I lay still as possible. The area was then teeming with German soldiers excitedly conversing when suddenly Pedro was located. Screams of joy echoed through the night while the searchers continued for whoever else might be around. Little did I know there were only 2 of us. Should I try to shoot my way out? Where could I go? Could I get away? Will they start shooting before I can? Should I give up? The question whizzed by as I tried to think. No one was speaking English and I spoke no German. But that indecision came suddenly to an end as I felt a German boot in my back. I too had been discovered. More cries of glee, fast German conversation, and orders that indicate I should stand up and give up my weapon. At that moment, I experienced the feeling of complete helplessness, knowing that for the immediate future, I must relinquish the freedom I had so much cherished and had been willing to give my life for, and learn to submit every moment to my captor's whim and to be willing to leave my future in the hands of God. I learned to accept what it said in Philippians 4:11. I've learned to be content with whatever the circumstances. I did think a lot during those moments about my parents. This was November the 10th. On November the 4th, 1944, my parents had celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary. Our dad had written that he was giving Mother a new wristwatch from us boys. And there we were, my oldest brother aboard a troop ship bound for the China-Burma theater, my twin brother on the front line just a few miles from me, later wounded in the Battle of the Bulge, and me now listed as missing in action. What an exciting 25th anniversary for our parents. Our Company B was composed of 250 men. 12 of those on November 10th, 1944 were assigned to guard duty at regimental headquarters, and other soldiers were on company detail, cooks, clerks, and so forth. So they did not take part in our skirmish. At the end of that fateful day, except those who did not participate, Pedro and I were all that was left of Company B, 110th Regiment, 28th Division. After being captured, we were taken to a German headquarters built of concrete in the side of a hill. The German major who interrogated us spoke excellent English, said he went to school at, I believe, Michigan State, and then returned to Germany. He asked us a number of questions, to which we replied that our orders were to give only our name, rank, and serial number. After a short interrogation, he sent us on our way with the comment, "Soldiers, I hope when this is all over, you will say that we Germans are just as human as you Americans." We spent that night in a barn under heavy guard, along with a number of other GIs from other units who had also been captured that day. The next day, we were marched into a small town, Euskirchen, and interrogated more carefully. They knew as much about our unit as we did, so we were safe. That was the last time I ever saw or heard about Pedro. I have no idea what happened to him. I pray he made it through too. About 20 of us were taken to a house in Flammersheim, a small farming village nearby, which was to be our home for several weeks. Our guards were assisted by guard dogs, which watched us extremely closely. We stayed in the bottom floor of the house, which is usually reserved for cows and other animals. Beds were boards and tiers. Food was sparse, usually German bread with barley and vegetable soup in the evenings. Each morning we were taken out in groups to work. We dug sugar beets, potatoes, turnips, and dug 88 millimeter anti-aircraft gun emplacements. One day, a group of 8 of us was taken to the train depot. Our job that day was to move boxcars to and from the loading platform. We were given long wooden 4x4s and blocks. By brute force, we moved those loaded boxcars into position so they could be unloaded, then out of the way so we could move another boxcar into place. During that day's activity, I slipped and fell and injured my shoulder. Actually, I must have pulled it out of joint. I received absolutely no medical attention. However, in 1971, I had it operated on because it came out of joint quite often. We enjoyed our farm laboring because we could steal potatoes, turnips, and sugar beets to eat. We learned to tuck our pant legs into our socks and blouse them down. This kept our legs warm, but it also gave us space to store stolen fruit items. About a month of this type of labor, we marched to Cologne. There were maybe 50 of us, with maybe 10 guards and dogs. People along the way threw rocks at us, spat at us, and of course, had many unkind things to say us in German, of course, so we didn't understand. The Cologne Railroad Yard had recently been bombed by our planes. We walked past the cathedral, which showed some bomb damage, then on down to the railroad yard, where we were put in boxcars. My wife Wanda and I visited Cologne 45 years later. It was indeed an unusual experience to walk along those same streets. It brought back memories. In the boxcars, the guards pushed several loads of bread into the cars, locked us in from the outside. Our next stop was Limburg, where a regular prison camp, Stalag, which is a short name for Stammlager or prison camp, Stalag 12, was to be our home for several weeks. It was cold with snow on the ground, and we had to keep moving our hands and feet to keep from freezing. At Stalag 12, we were registered as prisoners of war by representatives of the Red Cross and the German Army. We were not registered before that because one of our jobs while we were working at Flammersheim was to dig anti-aircraft gun emplacements, which was against the Geneva Convention. But we weren't officially POWs yet, so that made it okay for them. We were fingerprinted by fellow American POWs. So the prints were carefully put on the rolled cards and mixed up. We were given POW identification tags, which we were required to wear at all times. My POW number was 080543MS. We were deloused, given a shower, my last for almost 5 months, and assigned to a prison barracks. I was able to pick up a GI overcoat after that shower and wore it constantly from then on. On November 30th, the following telegram was received by my parents from the United States government. The Secretary of War desires me to express his deep regret that your son, Private First Class Allard, has been reported missing in action since the 14th of November. If further details are received, we will promptly notify you. On December 2nd, a letter was received by my parents from the War Department as a follow-up to the telegram missing in action, but no additional information. In Stalag 12 at Limburg, there were several thousand POWs, a mixture of American and British soldiers. We had three-tier bunk beds, no blankets, in a room for about 100 persons, with one small stove in the middle. Our food was provided in long steel vats. Each prisoner was responsible for his own bowl, mess kit, or whatever, and a spoon. I still have that mess kit. I didn't have a spoon, but I did obtain a German Army fork. I spent hours working on that fork handle, making it into a knife, so I could cut anything that was there, but I didn't need it. We were fed once a day, a piece of German bread, and some type of soup, which sometimes had pork or horse meat in it. We could save a portion to eat during the day. Imitation coffee and tea were provided regularly by prisoners and were often available. The British had their tea at 2 o'clock every afternoon, no matter what else was going on. The tea was usually very thin with powdered milk added to it. Small groups were taken out to work from this stalag, although I never had that opportunity. When those work parties came back in the evening, they brought often bread or some other food items to share or trade. These were items they had stolen during their day's work. We had areas where we could walk, but there was very little else to do. No books, no radios. Days were very long. I only stayed there a couple weeks. Then one day, PO numbers were called, and groups of 50 of us were taken to the railroad yard where we were again loaded into boxcars. This trip took about 4 days. Many hours were spent on sidings. Once the railroad yard was bombed, but our railroad car was missed. About once a day, the door was open just enough to push in some loaves of bread. It was very cold and we were very thirsty and hungry. Very few unkind words were spoken by fellow POWs, but really very little conversation took place. We were dirty, scared, and things were terribly uncertain. This was about Christmas time, and the only thing we did was sing Christmas carols. We sang every verse of every Christmas carol anybody ever heard of. And of course, we thought about our families and what they were doing. Lots of praying took place. Anyone who says they're atheists in war is insane. I never saw or heard one, nor did I ever hear anyone object to somebody leading the group in prayer. Finally, on December 21st, the doors of the boxcars were opened, and we were unloaded onto a platform at Mühlberg and taken to Stalag 4B. It too was a very large prisoner of war compound. This time we were divided by nationalities. There were Russians, British, and American sections, all separated by high barbed wire fences with about 20-foot no man's land between the sections. Sleeping facilities were about the same as before. Food was less than before. There was very little outside space to exercise and about a foot of snow on the ground. Toilets were outside trenches with a lean-to roof. Security was very strict. Lights were controlled from outside by the guards. During this day, we were given new POW numbers. Mine was 31133. Why we were given new POW numbers, I have no idea. I stayed in Stalag B about 2 weeks until again my number, along with 74 others, was called to prepare to leave. This only meant to bring a mess kit in your cup. We had no other possessions except our clothes, which we never took off. I did have 2 books. One, an American Bible Society New Testament, which I still have, and the other, a descriptive book of some of the famous operas. I read those books a number of times. The opera have escaped me completely. The Bible has been my companion throughout my life. Another boxcar ride of several days took the group of us in January the 8th, 1945, to Glauhau, a small industrial town about 90 kilometers west of Dresden. While at this location, we were listed as residing in Stalag 4B. It was on a beautiful Saxon hilly country area covered with snow. It was very cold. We were taken to a 3-story building on the side of a hill. The top story was our barracks. We had 2-tier beds with no mattresses and no covers. Steam heat that sometimes worked, and tables to sit, to eat and talk. Our toilet was inside, although the flush water seldom worked. The door was a large, thick steel door, and the only window in the entire building was in the bathroom, covered with heavy steel bars. Let me digress for just a moment. I have a twin brother, John. He and I went into the service together through basic training and were sent to the European Theater of Operation on the Queen Elizabeth. When we moved up to the front, I was assigned to the 110th Regiment, and John went to the 112th Regiment, both a part of the 28th Division. This was following Army regulations that family members should not be assigned to the same unit after the death of four Sullivan brothers on a naval ship. Our division, the 28th National Guard Organization, the emblem, a bright red insignia often called the bucket of blood, was the 28th Division. Although November 10th was my last day on the front, John continued in the thick of things into the Battle of the Bulge, when our 28th Division took the main blow. On December 31st, after the Bulge was in full swing, John was hit by a German rifle bullet, which went between the bones on his left wrist and lodged in his right shoulder. He was taken to medical station, then flown to England for surgery and recuperation. As I have previously described, upon me being listed as missing in action, my parents received a telegram from the War Department. A similar telegram was sent when a soldier was wounded, and then another telegram when John was transferred to another hospital. Then another telegram when he was flown to the hospital in the U.S. On March 25th, my parents received this letter from the War Department regarding the status of PFC Allard, that's me. Mission: repulse the enemy counterattack. Point of departure near Vosnik, Germany. Last known whereabouts near Vosnik, Germany. A physical check of PFC Allard's organization was made after a strong enemy attack, and he is missing. This was received over 4 months after I was taken prisoner. On March 27th, 2 cards I had written on December 28th were received by my parents. I realized that's 3 months later. So they already knew I was a prisoner before the next telegram arrived. On that day, March 27th, my mother and dad were leaving their home in Willows to drive to Fort Lewis, Washington, to visit my twin brother John, who was in the hospital undergoing treatment for wounds received on December 31st in the Battle of the Bulge. What a wonderful message for them to receive just before they left. It had been an extremely hard winter for them. One son, Kenneth, in the Signal Corps in India. One son, John, wounded and recuperating in Washington. And the other son, me, finally known to be a prisoner of war. Then on April 9th, my parents received the following telegram. The Secretary of War desires to express his deep regret that your son, PFC Allard, is a prisoner of war. Further information will be furnished. But thank the good Lord, they never received the killed in action telegram for any of their sons. Although they did have letters addressed to me, returned, marked, deceased. My parents flew the American flag every day, were exceedingly proud of their sons. I often think of my parents and others even less fortunate for their stamina and courage during those rough times of World War II. What a challenge for me to live up to their feeling of God's protective and loving arms. But back to my experience. The guards in our building lived right outside the large steel door. The bottom floor of the building was a small factory where wooden wagon wheels were made. 30 of our POW group worked there every day. I was more fortunate. The other 45 of us went daily to a railroad station and took the train about 10 kilometers to Glauhau to work in a large factory. We had the opportunity to get outside into the fresh air, walk a short distance each day, and ride the train. Once in a while, we rode in the passenger section. It was there I first heard the song Lily Marlene being sung by a group of German girls on their way to work. Usually, however, we rode in the baggage cars and had to sit on or beside postal packages addressed to German recipients. We learned to carefully open those boxes and liberated often food items for our own use. We were thankfully never caught. The factory where we worked operated 6 days a week, 10 hours a day, and each of us was required to punch a time clock. The only time in my life I was ever required to punch a time clock. The factory made items of wood for cars, wagons, sleds, trucks, and sometimes airplane parts punched out of aluminum sheets. My job was to work with the operators of a large endless bandsaw. Another POW and I were to bring large pieces of lumber in from the yard and help the sawyer hold it and feed it into the saw. They cut out pieces after marking patterns on the boards according to the pieces they were asked to supply to the rest of the factory. We discovered that we could move the wood abruptly and break the endless saw blade. We did that often. Usually we were cussed out, but never physically abused. One of our sawyers walked with a limp, the result, he told me, of an American rifle bullet from World War I. On a regular basis, he would take me to his workbench, point to a map of Germany on his board, and indicate where the bombing had taken place the night before. Boom, boom, he would say, pointing to some specific city on the map. As the American armies got closer, he would show me where our troops were gaining ground. Each sawyer brought his lunch to work in a briefcase every day. Then at the end of the day, they would very secretively cut pieces of wood to fill up their briefcase and take the wood home. We presumed that that was their supply of firewood. On several occasions while we were getting wood in the yard, which is surrounded by a high security fence, passers-by would ask us to trade wood for food, maybe an apple or a piece of bread, which we gladly did. Our food was very routine. Every evening we were given a bowl of rutabaga soup and a piece of German black bread. About once a week, we were also given a small serving of a horse meat meatloaf. We would drink the soup liquid in the evening, eat the solid rutabagas for breakfast, and the bread was our lunch. Their bread was about 20% sawdust, which was very filling but not very nutritious. We never changed our clothes. We never took a shower. We did not have soap or toothbrushes or toothpaste. Several of us wore out our socks. Upon repeated requests to our guards, we were issued new socks, a piece of heavy cloth about 16 inches square for each foot. By standing on it and folding the edges up and around the foot, it served the purpose. We were required to shave often, no shaving cream, and usually a dull razor, and were given haircuts monthly. On April 13th, we left work early and could hear and feel the bombing in the distance. We were told that the invaders were near and we would be moved the next day. We were terribly excited that night. Food was not important. Sleep was impossible. All night we discussed our alternatives. Our decision was we would not participate in marching away from the sounds of American artillery. Each prisoner figured out a stalling excuse. Broken shoelaces, torn pants, sore legs, stomach aches, every possible physical and mental problem. Early on the morning of April 14th, our guards beat on the door, which was their usual method of getting us up, and told us to get ready to leave. We began to slowly give our pre-planned excuses, and the German guards originally tried to meet our needs. Very quickly, they realized our plan and ordered us to be ready to leave. We continued to stall. Then we realized the guards had left without us. Very soon thereafter, a jeep appeared with 4 American GIs. Our lookout at the one window was waving our quickly drawn U.S. flag and screaming for recognition. Apparently a French POW had told them there was a group of Americans there. The GIs entered our building, shooting out box as they came up the stairs, each time shouting to make certain we were not in the way. There was crying, hugging of the liberators, and excitement too great to describe. These soldiers, member of General Patton's Third Army, called back to their headquarters looking for personnel vehicles to transfer us back to friendly lines. We walked a short distance before a long line of GI tanks arrived, giving us a ride back to the relocation camp set up in an abandoned German army barracks. Fried chicken and all the trimmings were the menu that evening, along with tremendous excitement on our part. We got sick from eating too much, just too much for our weak bodies. I had lost 100 pounds, which was about average for each one of us. The next morning, we had bacon and eggs and pancakes before we loaded on trucks and were taken to the airport. When my dad received the first letter, I wrote that I was liberated. He was on his way to meet my mother, to take her to meet my mother because she was on her way to work. He drove across town to catch Mother. He ran into a truck on the way and pretty well tore up the front of his car. He jumped out, told the driver he had just received a letter from me, and ran down the street to a block to catch Mother, which he did. No one was hurt. Everybody was extremely happy. The joy of living in a small town. And then on May 3rd, the Secretary of War sent a telegram saying, "Your son, PFC Allard, has returned to military duty on 14th of April." So ended 156 days of being a prisoner of war. I was back with friendly forces and hopefully on my way home. The war was going well and the Germans would surrender on May the 7th, 1945.
So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. It's really hard for me and a lot of my family to watch this video because this was captured when my grandfather was still really healthy. Whenever he did have cancer, it took quite a toll on him. And this was captured one of the last few things when he was still healthy. fantastic human being. His experiences as a prisoner of war, I remember him telling me that if he can go back in time and knew that what he was going to go through, he would do it 100 times fold, no problem whatsoever. And that really stuck out to me throughout my life. One lesson I still think about regularly, almost on a daily basis, from my grandfather is wanting to just be a good human being. Do good. Don't be a jerk. He's just a fantastic human being that saw greatness in everyone. Really appreciate you guys watching the video. Don't forget to like and subscribe this video for be able to stay tuned with future videos. Come back on a weekly basis. We'll be announcing on Discord any new releases that are coming up, and also, of course, join Discord, because without that, you won't hear about future videos that are coming out unless the subscribe button seems to show you. So thank you so much, everyone, and thank you for your service to those that served, and thank you for those that support us.